The idea is to hear from these two ladies who have had really remarkable careers in public administration. They happen to be in transportation fields, but they're here to talk a bit about their careers, what made a difference in terms of career paths and lessons learned.
We have two very esteemed speakers today who are our guests and who we're glad to have here. We're going to do this in a sequential framework. So we're going to start by hearing from Geraldine Nats. She is she has served as the managing director of the Port of Long Beach for many years, and she's currently the president of the International Association of Ports and Harbors. She has been here for a long time. She's been a leader in transportation for quite some time, oversaw the environmental improvement that happened at the ports, and if you were at an earlier event that we've had with Mayor Villaraigosa, he noted that was one of the major accomplishments of his tenure as mayor, and he has you to thank for that, for a lot of that. She's an alumna of USC, so she is back home. Welcome back to campus, and she's getting an award later on this afternoon. So there's another reception that she's having with the president and the provost. So she's going to run out of here. So I wanted to start by having her go first. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And yes, I do want to start out with an apology to say I usually don't like to speak and run, but you know, this is my third week of retirement. On my first week of retirement, I learned that I was elected to the National Academy of Engineering, which is a very high honor. And then I immediately heard from USC they were going to hold a reception. So my calendar's wide open, and wouldn't you know, the two things I have this week are at the same time. So that starts at 5 o'clock. And so as you heard, I've had a very long career working for both the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and I spent the past 8 years as the executive director of the Port of Long Beach. So while I was in that job, I put together what I called my sort of rules, things that I learned along the way. And there's about 10 rules, but I went through and I picked off a couple of those rules, and I thought I would share them with you because they're things that kind of people taught me or were rules I set along the way. And actually, I might talk about public service in my family. I come from a long line of New York City firemen. All right, so you married a Catholic Irishman and you went into public service. And my mother kind of broke the mold, and then things kind of went haywire after that. But I did spend my entire career, except for the short time I worked at USC, in public service. And one of my and it was a great career. As I told people at my retirement reception, I got to meet with the president of China, President Xi. I got to meet with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. I got to meet with Mark Wahlberg. So those are some of the highlights of my career. But some of the things I learned along the way, and my number one rule that I would share with the staff is use we, not I. Very early in my career at the Port of Long Beach, my boss calls me in. I'd written one of my first memos, and he had this memo in big circles around the whole page, and he circled all the I's. I did this, I did that, I think this, I think that. And he said to me, we don't use I, we use we. It's about the team. And you know what? I've kept that lesson. I probably wrote that down, and I've used that through my entire 37 years of public service. Even today, when I would write memos and I would go back, and sometimes I'd have to correct my own. Cross out the I and make it a we, that it was always about the team. And that was a good lesson. And I think that's helped me through my career. I did have other rules, I'll have to say. The ladies, like when I got to the Port of LA as executive director, all deals made in the men's room are automatically null and void. So things like that. But my second rule was do what's right, sleep at night. A great rule if you go into public service. If you're embarrassed about getting up before your board and explaining why you have to hire your brother-in-law and give him this contract, then it's probably not a good thing. So, and a lot of times people they go through all sorts of contortions so they don't have to avoid taking something to the decision-making body. I'm like, why? We take it to them, and if they don't like it, they'll tell us. So do what's right, sleep at night. Third one, keep the main thing the main thing. And I think Gina Marie will recognize, working under Mayor Villaraigosa, it was like every week you had a new initiative, a new plan. And it's like we'd be working on 100 different things and you'd move them forward about 10%. And I can remember that one of my major goals as port director was, oh my God, we have to get an EIR before the Board of Harbor Commissioners that they would feel good about adopting. You know, we had to get, you know, we had 7 years without approving any project. We had to put something before them that they'd feel good about, that they were making an environmental improvement at the same time helping business. And it was so I had to keep focusing people. Focus. The EI, that's the only thing we have to do. If that's the only thing we get done this whole year, we've got to get this one thing done. And so I see it a lot in public agencies. We got a bazillion different initiatives and we don't finish any of them. And at the end of a term, an elected body's term, what did he finish? What things were done? And so keep the main thing and focus and get things done. So, oh, this one I love. I would always say when people would come to me about things and I'm like, is that a dumb? Does that sound dumb to you? If it's dumb, it's not our policy. So that became one of my rules. If it's a dumb idea, it's not our policy. You know, we're using forms that say at the bottom 1973. Why don't we change it? You know, we're doing the same thing over and over again. And sometimes people get in a rut. And I think that's why turnover is always good in agencies, because people come in with different views. In the city of LA, one of the frustrations is people come in at the top and they come in at the bottom. And it's hard to inject new blood all through the structure of the civil service system. And I think that's a good thing, because new blood brings new ideas. And then people will ask, is that dumb? If it's dumb, it's not our policy. And then my last one that I was going to share with you was, I stole from my idol, Martha Stewart. When you're through changing, you're through. Change is very invigorating. I tell people the story that when I applied for the executive director position at the port, there were newspaper articles about all the people trying to get the job. I was kind of unknown, dark horse, sticking my application in the process. And I got a letter back saying, thank you for your application, but we have much better qualified candidates. I thought, okay, you know, LA politics, it's wired for somebody, you know. So, and my husband, who's right here in the front, John, said to me, oh, they sent you the wrong letter. And I'm like, oh, for crying out loud, a big famous headhunter doesn't send you the wrong letter and bump you out. Although I thought it was a little strange. I was number 2 at Long Beach and I wasn't qualified for the job at LA. And he said, no, they sent you the wrong letter. I said, they did not send me the wrong letter. He said, you should call them, they sent you the wrong letter. And you know what? I resisted that because you know what? I was comfortable. I love my job at the Port of Long Beach. I got up, you know, I didn't get up that early. Everybody left around 4:30. It was comfortable. It was easy. I looked over at LA and I'm like, oh my God, that's a hornet's nest, you know, jumping into that political hotbed. And so he said, they sent you the wrong letter. I'm like, I'm going to show you. I'm going to call them and say, and I felt really stupid doing this. I'm Geraldine Nats and I got a letter from you that you got me out of this, you know, in the first round, and did you send me the right letter? You know, you feel kind of stupid doing that. And this woman is on the other end of the line. I hear her riffling through these papers. And she says, oh my gosh, we sent you the wrong letter. She said, I'll send you a replacement out right away. And so the replacement comes out. I get the letter. It's addressed to some man that I never heard of. Setting up an interview, 5:30 on a Saturday night at an airport in LAX. I thought, oh boy, I'm an afterthought. They just slapped me on the end of the day. So I figured, okay, I'm just gonna be this man. I said, I get it. You gotta be a man to get in. I'm gonna just be this person and show up. So I go up to Ellis, this, you know, Marriott or whatever it is up there by Yellow, no, whatever it is. And I went up there, and so I get in. They were expecting me, but the headhunter is sitting there, and he's like the president of the firm. Wouldn't you know, the guy nods off on me. And I'm sitting there like, oh, for crying out loud. You know, I got a short skirt on. You know, here I am in a hotel room with a man that's not my husband. The guy's nodding off. I'm like not speaking quietly. And I'm sort of animated, so I'm like, why can't I keep this guy awake? And so I was about ready to knock the ice water over into his lap and wake him up. But I got through that interview, and I remember coming home with my tail tucked between my legs, and my husband said, don't worry about it. You just have to get into the next round. And of course, he was right both times. But I have to tell you, when I took that job, I went outside my comfort zone, and sometimes you have to take that big leap. It was like when we went out and went zip lining. You have to take that first step where you fall and then boom, the hook catches you. I went outside my comfort zone. It was the most invigorating thing I ever did in my life. And I had a fabulous time there. And so I was, you know, at 3 o'clock, I got up at 4:45 for 8 years. And I would work in the office for 12 hours and the day would be gone. And I'm like, where did it go? I'm having so much fun. It was fabulous. It was very invigorating. So my message to you, students, graduate students, is don't be afraid to take that step off into the unknown, because it is very invigorating, and follow all the other rules, especially the one, if the deal is made in the men's room, it's automatically null and void. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
In the environmental changes at the port, what are you most proud of?
You know, I'm most proud of the turnover in trucks, because you know, as I tell people, I've been sued and I've been booed. We got this idea that, and actually I learned later, going back to that interview process, when I went into the panel interview, I happened to say, as an aside, I think we need to get rid of these dirty trucks, because, you know, the port was where the old long haul trucks went to die. So they were really old, you know, a lot of them in the 80s and things like that. And right before I left Long Beach, we did the first health risk assessment for an EIR. And I looked at the results and I'm like, oh my God, we're never going to get below the threshold of significance for health risk. And we could never put a document before the board that says, approve this project, and oh, by the way, you're going to increase the cancer risk in this neighborhood. That's not going to happen. You know, you might as well like just shoot me, you know. So we came up with this idea of banning trucks, and we implemented it. And I remember that, and every truck had to have a sticker on it beginning like October 1st. And I remember September 30th driving around the port around 5 o'clock. Not one truck has a sticker on it. And I'm thinking, I'm waking up tomorrow and my career is over, you know. And so I get up and you know, get to work, and I called the dispatch, the port police, because they were manning all the gates, and about 85 to 90% of the trucks had stickers on. They just didn't put it on until the very last minute. You know, they got up in the morning. And so we set a fee for any truck that wasn't 2007 model year or better, right from that first day. Even though they were allowed to use the trucks, $100 extra to get through the gate. And if you were a regular truck hauler, in 18 months you could have bought a new truck. So in 18 months, what we thought was going to take like 4 to 5 years, the whole truck fleet turned over. It was dramatic improvement in air quality. And I used to have a motto I tell the staff: it's impossible, it's difficult, it's done. And I have to tell you, we didn't know what we were doing when we started this truck program. It was a real case of adaptive management. We started things, oh, this is not working, we got to change. We issued this regulation or advisory. I'm like, oh my God, then we have a big uproar, and then we have to change that. And so it was probably one of the highlights, because the management team, we would sit down and we'd talk about, oh my God, this is a problem, how are we going to solve it? And we do it on the fly, and man, that is really exciting. And in some ways, we feel like we changed an industry.
Any advice for women in public administration? I know it's still a very much male-dominated field, especially at your position, you know, as director. Any advice for women who are pursuing that career?
Well, you know, the ports have been very male-dominated. You know, coming over to LA, you know, Mayor Villaraigosa brought in a lot of women. At Long Beach, it was a little bit different. There was a time I got to number 2 and I was told, we can't promote you. We can't take you to Japan. We can't, I had bosses like that. I have to tell you though, sometimes somebody tells you that, that automatically in public service. That's like, a violation. People can't tell you that. But I have to be honest, I was not the type to sue. It was like, what, you don't play golf? What's wrong with you? I learned how to play golf. I was like a nose to the grindstone. And when I got passed over for promotion, the guy who got bumped over me, ahead of me, had 3 daughters. And I figured, what, if anybody's gonna recognize that, he will, and he ultimately promoted me. So I kept my nose to the grindstone. I just produced results. I had a boss who told me, your job is to make me look good. I always, it was like, it's all about we make the whole team look good. And I was not the type to like, oh, you passed over for me and I'm gonna sue you. I know a lot of people do that. It just was not my thing. But it took me a long time. It was like, this came at the end of my career. It wasn't at the beginning. There was no like jumping over stuff. So I did my time, I guess. So.
In terms of gender equality, did you find many opportunities to promote women below you?
Well, my management team had more women on it than men, the senior management team. And so we would joke about that. We'd like all bundle into a van. We'd be going to some meeting or something. And then every once in a while I would say, wait, let's let the men talk. And then we'd let them talk, and so, but yeah. But it was, really, I looked for the best people. I looked for the best person to come in and head up the whole security and operations. I looked for the best person on the business side. I wasn't specifically like, oh, I have to have a woman. There's one area in the port where we've never had a woman, a pilot in the vessels. And they go out there, they climb up the ship and the Jacob's ladder, out at sea, and then they take command of the vessel, not officially command, but they guide the vessel in to port. And so that's a really hard job to even find a woman to take that job, because most of the sea captains happen to be men. And another thing, a word of advice, when I hit the glass ceiling at Long Beach, I built my career outside of the port. I got involved in the International Association of Port Authorities, the American Association of Port Authorities, Transportation Research Board. I got to know port directors all around the world. And when the commissioners from Long Beach would go and travel, they'd run into people who would say to them, oh, say hi to Geraldine for me. Around the world, and all of a sudden they started like, oh, what's she doing? So I built a career outside my organization. So when I applied over for Villaraigosa and they started finding out about me, I had these connections around the world that I had built in some ways outside of, my organization. So, because I put my own time into it.
The second speaker we have today is equally esteemed. Gina Marie Lindsay was appointed the Executive Director of Los Angeles World Airports by Mayor Villaraigosa in 2007. LAX and its sister institutions, it's actually much bigger than just LAX. It is a major driver of what happens in this metro area, and you are very much in a very important role. You're overseeing the modernization of the airports, and is there anyone here who has not been to one of these airports in the last month? Last month? Oh, we got one. So we've all seen it, and we understand that it's a really important effort, and we couldn't have a finer person leading that effort. She has led a number of airports, so this is just the latest stop. She was the director of SeaTac up in Seattle, and actually has a rivals pavilion named after her because of the great work that she did. And she also ran the airport in Anchorage. So making her way down the Pacific seaboard, we hope this is your last stay for a while. She was appointed to the Executive Council for the Next Generation Air Transportation System, and is also a member of the Airport Cooperative Research Board. Please join me in welcoming Gina Marie.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Listen, you guys have been standing, listening to somebody. If you guys want to go out and get food and wine, please do. I would love to make this a conversation. So you guys need to be comfortable and you know, let's engage. I'm going to, I truly am sorry that Geraldine and I don't get to talk together because we do have very similar experiences. I am going to take off on one of the things that she kind of ended with, and then we'll work backwards, or we'll just hopscotch all along. Her last point really was how important it was for her to get involved in national and international associations, where she met and worked on, she didn't say this, but I know because I work with sister organizations, where you really are working on policy issues for your industry. You get to know other people that are in similar jobs across the nation, across the world. And she's absolutely right that word of mouth, if you happen to be an involved person, no matter how short you are, if you have a loud voice, it will, you know, you will get recognized. I will tell you the story of me getting hired here in Los Angeles, which is somewhat similar to hers in many ways. Mayor Villaraigosa had a headhunter that was out scouring nationwide to find somebody to run these airports. Came up with 2 short lists, and he was not happy with either one of them. I was working at the time in Washington, D.C. I had done my last airport. It was going to be, I introduced myself as a reformed airport director, recovering airport director. I was driving in my little car in Washington, D.C. up 16th Avenue, and my cell phone rings, and it says, "Hello, this is Antonio Villaraigosa. Do you have a moment to talk to me?" Well, I was completely floored. I'd never met the mayor. I knew who he was because he's very high profile. But he essentially said, "I've had 2 short lists from this headhunter, and I'm not happy with any of them. And when I talk to people everywhere I go, they say, you're the one that should do this." Well, how would anybody have told him that, right? They didn't, you know, he didn't know who I was. I had no ties whatsoever. I'm not like Geraldine. I have no ties to Southern California. I was born in Northern California. And yes, it is the same state. But he was uncommonly persistent in not listening to his headhunter. He said, "I want to meet you." So we sat down, we talked, and the rest is history. But I think what that tells you, I did not know Geraldine's story until I heard it tonight. What it tells you is that the system that often spits out who is qualified to apply for and to interview for and then ultimately potentially be offered positions like this, question that system. It, in many instances, is broken. So don't let it faze you. I love what Geraldine had to say about being confident. I mean, her husband actually there were probably a lot of times in the last 6 years he said, "Why did I ever do that?" Because her life was so hectic. But I think it's really important for you guys who are starting out in careers or who are migrating from one to another to realize that your self-esteem, your confidence in yourself should not ever be defined by what happens in the application and the interview process. Sometimes it's just whacked, and you need to kind of persevere beyond that. So I'm going to back up now from the very beginning just to tell you just a little bit about me. I actually was born in Northern California, but my father thought there were too many people in California in 1963, and so he took us to Alaska. And I grew up in Alaska. I came out to Washington for college, but wanted to go back to Alaska. And so I'm in Alaska. And here's what I learned in Alaska that I think is actually applicable to everyone. I learned to be self-reliant. I learned entitlement is not a word I like in my vocabulary at all. I am responsible for my own fate, and I really believe that if you are not risk averse, in other words, if you will lean in to something that you may not know, but if you're really willing to work hard and learn it, you can do anything. You truly can do anything. I worked for the Department of Transportation there. I was going to be a news broadcaster, but they didn't make any money in local markets at that point in time. I went to work for an engineering firm as an administrative assistant. fell into doing subdivision and land use planning, went to work for the Department of Transportation, which in Alaska basically owns and operates all the transportation modes, harbors, seaports, airports, roads, even mass transit. It's just that there's not a lot of mass in the mass transit. So that was a 3-year training program. So I became a transportation planner by working through this 3 years. I worked in every mode except I got stuck in airports. I did not ever make it out of airports. I found them fascinating, and here's why. They are either the best of public and private or the worst of public and private. You have all of the challenge of trying to make your own revenue, your own profit and loss every year, because we don't live off of any general tax revenues. But you have all of the bureaucracy, regulations, and scrutiny of a public organization, any public organization. So I really thought it was challenging to be able to do that in a business-like way when you're really within the morass of general government. And so I found it fascinating and just didn't get out of that. In Alaska, the director of Anchorage and Fairbanks airports is a politically appointed position. I had gotten to the top of to where I could go from a civil service standpoint when I was 36, and the governor, who had already announced he wasn't going to run again, asked me if I would take over the Anchorage airport. So if you are a risk-averse person, you would say no, because what you're doing at age 36 is stepping into a position that is governed by a person who already said he wasn't going to run again, so at best you're going to have 2 years left, right? I did it anyway. And I lived through that gubernatorial transition for 2 years into the new one. Then I was recruited down to Seattle, worked in Seattle for 11 years for a port authority, an airport authority. The seaport and the airport are combined there. They're independent. They are not a part of the city government or the state government. It is absolutely the way to run enterprises like this, and that's what should be done here. It won't be, but it's what should be done. And then I went to Washington, D.C., was there for 2.5 years when I got the mayor's call. So now you've got the big pieces of how I ended up doing this. I could tell you, a lot of different things, but I would rather find out what you guys want to hear about.
So I got the chance to hear your environmental director speak at I was at an engineering conference recently. He was saying how many challenges there are to updating a place like LAX in terms of water recycling and also just general infrastructure. Like, it's not built to catch rainwater, any of the things that we would think about now. Right. What are some of the roadblocks that you have found in terms of updating this huge infrastructure to something that's more modern and environmentally forward-thinking?
Yeah. Well, one is the basic design. That sounds like Roger Johnson. And he knows what he's talking about because he's now in charge of the capital program trying to deliver this stuff. But let's talk a little bit about environmental, and then let's talk about modernizing the airport. The environmental process, I think, started out being a really good environmental process. CEQA probably had really great intent, and there is no doubt that in the past we were doing a lot of things development-wise. This is generically, not just the airport. People, developers, construction, whatever, was being done without the appropriate cognizance of the impact on the environment. So great intentions, but I would have to say great intentions run amok, because now the environmental process really is being used a great deal to stop things that are politically controversial. And that's a different thing. Political controversy should be dealt with as political controversy. Environmental impact should be evaluated and mitigated based on whatever is scientifically and analytically determined to be environmental impact. So it's hard for me to answer the difficulty, the environmental difficulties, the scientific impacts of whatever we're going to do are pretty easy to evaluate, and if they were not inextricably entwined with political controversy, we could deal with them. But let me give you an example. One of the things that we are really working on trying to figure out these days is how to build an automated people mover system, how to put an intermodal transportation facility together, and then how to connect it at some point with light rail, hopefully. It would probably take us 10 to 15 years to build all of that because of air quality restrictions that are in place and because of the construction impacts to air quality, air quality construction impacts through the construction process, which is strange in a way, because if you're using logic, you know that the end result is going to be a transportation system that actually improves air quality. But the difficulty in getting through that process in order to achieve the goal of improving air quality is pretty much a difficult path to find your way through. And part of the reason it is because there is sometimes political controversy with these developments. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think for a public policy group, it's a real challenge for you guys to try to think forward in the world you're going to be working in, that confusion between very valid environmental interests and political interests is going to have to be sorted through, or we will never work our way through to be able to implement things that will actually make a better environment for us. Other things, obviously, are from a practical standpoint, you know, we have about 182,000 passengers that come into LAX every day. Every day, 182,000. That's passengers. That's not meters and greeters. It's not employees. And so, and it's a very small footprint. How do you achieve construction when you're still trying to run the airport? It's like remodeling your kitchen during, you know, Christmas dinner. Something like that. So that is a very real impediment as well.
So 4 or 5 life principles that you stated at the beginning, like being self-sufficient,
being independent,
yeah, being independent,
relying on yourself, yeah.
Entitlement is not in your dictionary.
No.
Those things really resonate with things that I believe too. But I think there are life events or decisions that you made in your career that really shape those or like highlighted the values for you. Mm-hmm. So could you share some of those like moments or decisions you had to make and what the outcomes were?
Sure, I hope I'm going to get at what you're asking as opposed to what I just want to tell you. So you can check me on that when I'm done. Okay, I have either the benefit or the disbenefit, depending on your perspective, of having been raised with pretty strong set of principles that my parents, you know, said this is what you do. You know, like, I believe you always tell the truth, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how embarrassing it is to tell the truth because, you know, you screwed up somewhere or whatever. I believe in those kinds of things, and I think that my job typically is to be an advocate for the organization that I work with and whatever is going to perpetuate the best interests of that organization or that industry in going into the future. When you're doing that in a political environment, I have time after time after time run up against whether I hold the line and I am stubborn and I say, no, I'm afraid I can't do that. I just can't. That's not the right thing to do, in my view, for what is important for the airport. And so even though you're my boss, even though you're my board of directors, here is why I believe that is not the right thing to do. And I've tried very hard to learn how to explain our viewpoint on why this is the right way to go as opposed to that way. And once I've made that case, if it's an important enough issue, I will not budge. And those are the times that are really the hardest for me. I'll go, you know, I'll stand in front of the bathroom mirror and say, wait a second, I know you're supposed to be flexible, you know you're supposed to be malleable. When is it better to give in and live to fight another day? Because if you believe you're doing a good job and you believe the organization is better for what you can bring to it, then leaving the organization is a bad thing, right? But if you don't stand for something that is very consistent, then what have you become? And those moments, and I am embarrassed to tell you, I've had legions of them throughout my career, those are my hardest moments. And I have, while I was here in the city of Los Angeles, stayed firm on my ground twice that I was ready to walk down the road, and I said I would walk down the road. And we ultimately got what I was advocating. Now, that is not something that I want to say to all of you guys, this is what you should do, because it can be a perilous path, and you always have to figure out whether you have to be ready to take the consequences of making that kind of a stand. But I always figure out, you know, can I look at myself the next day in the mirror? So it's individual for each person, you know, whether they can draw the line and they're ready to say, this is what I believe in and I can't go any farther. But I honestly believe that within an organization, if people know what you stand for, they will gradually rally behind you. I'm a big leader. I am a big believer in leadership. I believe in leadership more than management, even. Because if you can set an aspirational goal for people, it's amazing what people can do. And I have just learned so much, and I have grown so much in being able to work with people who will walk over hot coals to try to achieve a goal, no matter how hard it is, if they've got leadership that they believe in and that they know will never abandon them. I think that's a really important thing, too.
You talked about, you know, when you arrive, when you're trying to make a decision as to whether to stand and fight or to compromise. Is that, and you talked about looking in the mirror, is that a dialogue?
I call them mirror conversations.
Is that a dialogue primarily you have with yourself? Are there others out there whose advice you trust and you bounce it off of them? They may not work directly with you, they may be in other fields, but have you developed that sort of a network where you feel folks you can be, that are confidant to you, that you can confide in and ask them, what would you do or what should I do? Have you developed that network?
It's a great question, Paul, and the answer is yes. And I say yes with a qualification that always, you know, we need to understand the interests of the person that you're talking with. Now, let me use an example of my past board chairman. I thought he was great. I still think he's great. He walks on water some of the time. And, you know, I would sit down and I could have a conversation with him, and I would need to say, okay, you know, Alan, this is the you and me person to person. This is not you and me board chairman to, you know, airport director, because I would know what his motivation would be that way. But yes, the answer is yes, for the reason that I need their brain power. The other reason is, you know, every one of us views the world and a particular situation and any particular conversation through our own lens. And so sometimes you need somebody else to say, you know what, you may have heard it that way, but that's not the way it was intended. And so you need that kind of a ballast, I think. You just need to be careful at who it is you're having those conversations with.
Did you have mentors as you were coming up through the ranks?
Yeah, I really did. I had folks that...
did they just adopt you, or did you seek them out?
No, they kind of adopted me. I think that people they seek people out and they support people that help solve their problems. And that was always my mission. Whenever I went to work with anybody, I wanted to help them solve their problems. And so it became really a symbiotic relationship where they wanted to take care of me because I was helping them get stuff done. I want to give you an example of, this is not so much a me example, this was actually me being the boss, and somebody kept running to me and saying, well, so-and-so is not including me. How come I'm not included in these meetings or in these conversations or this or that or the other thing? And I ended up saying to him, look, you aren't included because you're not perceived as adding value. And it's not that, you know, people need to check the box as to who needs to be around the table. You will automatically be around the table if you are helping people get things accomplished. So demonstrate your value and all the doors open. It's kind of magical. So yes, I ended up being adopted by a bunch of people who gave me tremendous opportunity. There's been a great deal of good fortune for me. And opportunity is certainly one of those with good fortune.
What fuels your passion for aviation, for the airport industry?
It's a great question because I don't have any interest in flying a plane. None whatsoever. I guess I have to go back to what I alluded to earlier. I like doing things that are really hard. That's rewarding to me. And I am particularly grateful for this particular opportunity in Los Angeles, because Los Angeles is known throughout the industry as being a really, really tough place to work. LAX in particular does not have a good reputation in the airport industry. And I could take this job because I could lose it every day. And I'm just in that stage in life. You were very kind, Raphael, to say experienced public administrators. What it really means is old, that have been around for a long time. So at this stage in my career, I thought it was a really fortunate thing for me to have the opportunity to do something that's really hard, that is very, very risky, but I thought I could uniquely do it because I could lose the job. Whereas most other people can't. I mean, shoot, if I was 34 years old, I couldn't do that. But since I can, I'm fascinated to kind of spend down as much political capital as I've got and to make the most of the 30 years of experience that I have behind me. So that's a little bit ancillary to what you asked. Why aviation in particular as opposed to the plethora of other things that are really hard to do? I seriously do like the juxtaposition of running a business and being publicly accountable. And the third element that I didn't talk about before is the diversity of what you deal with on a daily basis. I could never possibly be bored. In a given day, I'll be dealing with an unhappy airline because we're taking Gates out of service and he doesn't have any place to put his passengers. Or, a bad guy who's trying to get into the secure part of the airport. Or a new concession contract and what works or doesn't work. Or a construction issue that says, how am I going to build these 3 lanes? This is coming up, so this is a warning to all of you. How am I going to redo the upper roadway and not inconvenience, the 200,000 vehicles that go over it every day? So it's a real panoply of fascinating things. So that's why.
Favorite 2 airports in America?
In America?
Yeah, in
Would
America. And then favorite 2 international.
Okay. I have to say SeaTac. I mean, I really think it's pretty fabulous now. And they built another runway at SeaTac. They don't know how to do it. They know how to do it there. It took 20 years, but it got done. I think SeaTac is a really good airport. And I'm going to split this other 2. One is DFW, not for its layout, but because it is run in a very sharp business way. So the administration of that airport is very, very entrepreneurial. It's an airport authority. It's not general government. And so they run it like a business, and it's really smart. Facility-wise, I think Orlando is really good. Yeah. Internationally, I think Changi in Singapore is wonderful. I have not seen it, but it's been winning awards for the last 5 years, and that's Incheon. But I haven't seen it personally.
Thank you for both of these
Sure.
wonderful speakers. Very interesting, very focused and appreciative of who they are and how they need to relate to institutions to get things done. And I think a common thread was we need to get things done, and we're going to figure out how to work with the system to make that happen. Sometimes you can massage the system along, and sometimes you need to stand up to it. I actually really liked your both stories about how they got hired. Just so you know, I was 3rd choice for this job. So just understand that hiring and these processes, they're just processes, and you can make them more or less effective for you, and you should push and continue to fight and question. And then to close, great personalities, people. And if you're going to be in the business that we're talking about and we're in, you have to be people. And that will be sort of introduction to the rest of the evening, where hopefully you will be people with each other. But thank you all for coming, Paul.